You're listening to Up1Notch, a podcast where I explore the tech business world. My name is Mohammad Aoun, and I'm a growth accelerator for tech companies looking to scale their businesses. I'm sitting down with software industry leaders, startup founders, and tech experts. Tune in to hear about the latest and greatest from the tech world. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining into another episode of Up1Notch, a podcast where we talk about technology in general, as well as talk about startups and a lot of other stuff related to tech business world. Today, my guest is Christina. Hi, Christina. How are you doing today?
Good. Nice to meet you. I'm doing well. How about you?
Absolutely great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule. So I just thought maybe we'll invite you on the podcast episode, knowing that you've founded more than 3 startups, you've been traveling a lot and everything. So if you can start off with a bit of introduction about yourself, about the companies that you've founded, and then we can talk more about, I guess, building teams, building startups, talking AI and stuff like that.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, really nice to meet you. My name's Christina Björnström, like we kind of covered already. I'm the co-founder CEO of a company, artificial intelligence company called Nooroot. We're in stealth, so you probably won't find a website on it just yet, but we can maybe discuss some of the details later. My background is, I would say, heavily dominated by entrepreneurship. Whether it be co-founding a social enterprise in the consumable space, specifically coffee and tea, and then also as a co-founder, but not we can maybe go into like what it means to be a co-founder, because you don't have to be there on day one to be a co-founder. You can join later. So co-founder of My Foot in the Door, which was a hiring platform, which essentially helped people get their foot into the door in terms of foot into whatever industry or first job that they wanted to get. That was eventually acquired in, I believe, May of 2015. And I've since, my background's kind of all over the place. I ran the Swedish American Chamber of Commerce, New England, where I was responsible for facilitating trade, innovation, investment between the 2 regions, Sweden and then 6 states in the Northeast. I also ran Swedish American Chamber of Commerce Accelerator Program. So we worked with a lot of startups, specifically tech startups, because I think that they're just simply a little bit more globally scalable, or that's at least the promise. And most recently, before co-founding Nooroot, I worked for Terranet, which is an autonomous driving software company in the ADAS space, assisted driving, safety, etc. space. So yeah, that's kind of what I've worked on. I also advise and help startups on the side, and I'll maybe mention this because some people think at some point they either want an MBA or medical degree. My side hustle is I do MBA admissions consulting, where I help people that, who for, I don't know, maybe like NYU might be their highest reach. We would then work on getting into Harvard Business School, Stanford Business School, etc. And so if you're building a company, a lot of times I'm always surprised when I meet super smart people that are still really interested in getting an MBA for one reason or another. So if anyone in your audience ever wants to hit me up on that, let me know. So yeah, that's me. And nice to meet you.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So you started off by talking about like building companies and startups, and you've traveled across obviously Europe and you've in the US as well. So let's talk a little bit more about, like, for example, the cultural difference when it comes to like the providing the platforms, providing the ecosystems for startups to be able to build on. Do you see any differences between the cultural differences in Europe versus in US in terms of the facilities provided, venture capitalist companies and things like that?
It's an interesting question. So, for instance, if you look at Europe, I think there are a lot of generalizations one can make about Europe and building a company in Europe and access to capital, etc. but each country operates in sometimes super different ways, and other times in subtly different ways. Similarly, I would say in the US, a lot of companies, because for the most part, I'm just going to speak about my own experiences. I've helped a lot of companies that are doing really well in Europe and also other parts of the world, but I would say specifically the majority of companies I've helped that have made it to the US or helped bring them over to the US are based in Sweden, a lot in Denmark, some Norway, Finland, but Scandinavia as a whole. And I know Finland is not Scandinavia, but it's kind of lumped into the same. And then also some German companies, French, and those from the UK. I've not dabbled as much with companies from other parts of Europe. But also similarly, I would say those companies, when entering the US, you look at US as its own entity, its own country, and you think, okay, I need to have a US market entrance strategy. However, what I've come to realize, and I think a lot of people are beginning to realize, is when you go to the US, even if you're a so-called like tech startup with an online platform, you have to still figure out where in the US you want to go. Starting off in Boston, where I actually spent 10 years. I'm now based in Los Angeles, but starting in Boston is extremely different from, for instance, going to Silicon Valley. Everyone always thinks, oh, the first place I need to go to is Silicon Valley. A lot of people now are going to Austin, Boulder, Colorado. More and more are coming down to Los Angeles. And then Miami, like Florida is a big hotspot at the moment, Atlanta, blah, blah, blah. So I would say the biggest differences I would see in general between the two is that in Europe, especially smaller countries, and when I say smaller, I mean by smaller in terms of population. So let's talk about Sweden, for example, that has a population, I believe, of around 10.6 million. I could be wrong, but somewhere around there. Startups there have a tendency to go to market domestically a lot faster, more seamlessly, I would say, than in the US, because it's easier to establish product market fit. The community or the population there is a bit more homogenous, or a lot more homogenous in terms also educationally, taste-wise, experientially, etc. So for the most part, and every company is different and faces their own unique challenges, but my experience and what I've seen is it's easier to validate your product in a smaller market. And Sweden is a very innovative country, and they have a lot of resources that are available to those that want to start a company. However, there's a caveat to that, which is that raising larger rounds of financing is a lot more challenging, which is actually why so many companies in Europe go public, and they go public too soon because they use it as a way to raise capital. And usually you don't want to go public until you are ready to answer to any question that an investor might have. And of course, you want to be able to respond to questions, but when you're a startup and you've signed an LOI, I'm sure you know what that is, but I'll just define it: letter of intent from a potential customer. Usually, when you're a startup, that customer set will say, "Well, we'll only sign up with you if you agree to not announce anything." But if you're publicly listed, you have to announce that, because that has implications, that holds implications for the value of your company. So I think that's a challenge that a lot of European companies face. I think this is changing now, though, slowly but surely. One, I think the venture capital market in Europe is, I would say, stepping up its game. And then the other thing that's happening is, and I can't speak for everyone, but my impression is that especially in the last, 5 to 10 years, but really the last 5, 6, 7 years, is that bigger investment groups or VC firms in the US and even angel investors are paying more attention to what's happening outside. And one would think that that is always the case, but I can't tell you how many times I had investors, whether it be like venture capital firm, general partners of big firms, not like baby firms or baby shops, contact me to say, hey, we know nothing about the Nordics. Can you help us figure out what to do? I'm like, you just assume that these people know what's going on and that the companies that get funded are the best ones to get funded. And that if you're not funded, you're not on someone else's radar, that it means that you're not successful enough. And that's generally not the case. Other cultural differences that, I don't know, Mohammad is your name, right? Mohammad. So Mohammad, I don't know, have you been to the US before? So you've been to the US, right? And I think perhaps in other parts of the world, this is a lot more common, but in the US, you meet people and someone, like, you get into an elevator and people say, hi, like, how's your day? Like, you know, how are you? Random strangers will say that, not because they care. It's just like a cultural, like, common practice here. And you just say hi as a way, you both say hi, and then you both just end it at that. Swedes, Germans, Dutch, a lot of, I would say, Northern European people will go to, and also Japanese. I feel like I can say that I'm half Japanese, and they're kind of similar sometimes, which is they don't know how to respond in those situations. And they'll be like, oh yeah, I had a really tiring day and I ran into traffic and this and this. And then they don't understand why the American person then looks at them strangely and like rushes out the elevator. So translate that in a business setting. What would often happen is Swedish companies would also ask me to help them in the US market. So other companies, but I think Swedes encounter this the most. Swedes, Danish, Finnish, and Norwegian, like a lot, is they would say, Christina, I mean, we had, you know, that first meeting, you know, 2 months ago, and they said they were so interested in the meeting. They said that they loved us. They said that it was amazing. They said that we're going to have a follow-up meeting, and then we follow up with them and they don't respond. And to them, that concept, that the notion of being told, yes, we're interested. Oh, let's, you know, consider the next step. Let's explore the next step. The notion that a company or potential partner would say that and do that or express that, but not follow up, is unbelievable or like shocking to I would say a lot of people that are not experienced in dealing with, I would say, business in the US. I can give you some obvious signs when a company is interested and obvious signs when they're not. So these are the things that I often have helped companies figure out. And every case is different, of course, but there's some, I would say, overarching trends for sure.
Right. And definitely, I think a lot of that comes down from the perspective that they're brought up in different ways, right? For example, in the US, it's a very different culture. The corporate culture is very different. The startup culture itself is a huge universe, right? So, for example, when it comes to like these venture capitalist firms that are, let's say, being pitched like hundreds of startups every month, obviously they really need to kind of find a way how to say no, right? So they're saying a polite no, essentially, that, okay, we're going to get back with this, right? So let's talk a little bit more about, like, for example, team building for a startup. So what do you, in terms of specifically finding the tech talent to actually develop a tech product, how much of availability of talent is there in European markets? And given obviously their language barrier as well, like there's French people, there's Germans, there's other people. So what about the tech talent availability that is required there to build products for those specific locations?
It's a tough question to respond to without a strong possibility of offending a lot of people, but I like, my method is to be transparent and no filter. I will sprinkle in dust of diplomacy. But again, I'm completely generalizing because there are always exceptions to the rule. I have gone to Sweden countless times. Like at some point, I was going 10, 20 times per year for work. The impression I get oftentimes is that the quality of, let's say, the average developer in Europe, when I say Europe, I'm now specifically referring to the Nordics, Germany, France, is that the average developer is oftentimes better sometimes than the average developer that you might meet in the US in a typical, like, I'm not speaking about the average developer that you meet at Google or SpaceX. Like, to get in there, you have to be amazing in many ways. So I'm speaking about just overall in general. However, and here's where I risk offending people. And like I said, just disclaimer being that there are exceptions to the rule, and I'm always welcome being corrected. My impression is that when you get to the top 0.01% of expertise, and oftentimes I would argue that to accomplish something in artificial intelligence, something as complex as AI, machine learning, to build something actually disruptive, to really solve a problem on a scientific, I'm speaking about like scientifically, like coding wise talented people on the tech side, finding that 0.1 like top percentile, what I would say software recruiters describe as like walk on water coders, I have found to be more challenging than in the US. Let's just put it that way. In the US, you have the challenge of when you have those super talented people, and oftentimes those people are not American themselves. It's just that my impression overall, generalizing again, is that once you get to 0.1 top percentile in tech and STEM, and I'm speaking, you're already like 0.1 percentile top within an already top 1 percentile category overall, for some reason or another, again, exceptions to the rule, those people tend to somehow arrive in the US. I don't know how or why. And that's actually the case with our core founder, our inventor as well. And that talent is hard to come by, but I feel like you come by it a little bit more in the US, but it's also a lot more expensive. And unless they're your like co-founder, unless you give them I'm going to use generic terms, but cliche terms, slice of the pie, but measurably so, these are people that are going to be with you perhaps for 3 months, and then they skip because everyone's knocking on their door. So I don't know if that answers your question.
No, definitely. So I think that partly the reason for finding all that available talent in the US obviously naturally makes sense is because I was going through this startling statistic that basically, if you look at the global tech industries, for example, the market capitalization or the size of the tech industry in general, the global industry. So about 27% of that is just US alone. So obviously that's a huge market. And it is designed a number of ways to, I mean, you talked about, let's say, founders moving to US. I think that's because of H-1B visa as well. The US utilizes it really nicely.
Yeah.
Sponsoring people to come to US, essentially building their profiles there. The BBC framework and everything is much better. Obviously, more kind of designed to that as well. So, yeah. So let's talk also about, like, for example, finding a co-founder for a startup. So how hard is it, and what qualities to look for? Essentially, if you have to build a product and start a startup, what type of co-founder should you really look for, and what are the traits to essentially find that partner?
It really depends on how resourceful you are yourself and also what your personal core expertise is. I mean, in my case, I've either been the co-founder that another startup has kind of headhunted and asked me to join, or what also happens is I get introduced to whether it's a project or a startup and something inside me, it's never financially oriented in my case for some reason. I wish I had that mindset because I would then not worry about my bills as much later down the line. But I've either been headhunted to join, like I said, where someone found me somehow and said, oh, okay, like they pitched to me and they asked me to join. But other ways I've become a co-founder is I get introduced to a concept, idea, or project or a startup, and startup may already be funded. And I don't know, as a passion project, I just start helping, whether it's like setting introductions and then helping them, giving feedback on certain pitch decks, et cetera. And which oftentimes leads to, oh, Christina, can you actually fix this and this for us? Or, oh, this person got sick, can you stand in and like do the pitch for us? Where I kind of like work my way into the role. So anything that I've given 100% effort, or I would say my heart into, which is weird to say, but that's how I feel it is. It's never in my case ended with, if it's a team that I'm doing that with or another person, it's never, ever once ended in not leading to either being asked to be a co-founder, being asked to be the executive director, CEO, blah, blah, blah. I don't know if everyone's experience is the same. I feel like maybe that's not the case for everyone, but I think what that tells me, if I put myself in the other person's shoe, like they wouldn't be asking me to do that because, oh, I like Christina and she makes stupid jokes and she's, a fun person to be around, or, I just need an extra body in that seat. That's not why. It's, you have to deliver something of value. You have to be like the person that doesn't waste the other person's time. And I say that even after having arrived to this interview late, so my apologies. And then the other thing is, I think, and here again, I might say something a bit contentious, I don't know, but I'll just go with it, which is, say back in the day when Facebook first came around, PayPal first came around, then Snapchat, like those are the first real examples of the image of like the tech founder everybody has today, of this like young nerd at home tinkering around or in their dorm, and with a group of friends late night they start building something that the rest of the world then wants to have. But that was a path they took when that was still a super risky path. So I think I would say 20 years ago, the tech founders that were tech founders, I think a lot of them didn't get anywhere, but it was largely represented by people like real risk takers. Not saying that those people don't exist, but their successes have led to, in my opinion, people who formerly 20 years ago, if they were born 20 years before they were born, would have instead decided to be a dentist or a doctor or a lawyer or an investment banker. Today, the so-called like safer track, in a lot of people's opinion, is to become like a tech entrepreneur and then hope for a big exit. And I think a mistake that a lot of people make is they start off with the feeling or like the conviction that I need to start a business, right? Or I need to start a company with this so-called like big exit as a goal. And then when you ask them, well, what do you want to do? Like, what problem are you solving? Like, no, I just need to do something big. I just want to do something big. Like, I want to be the Red Bull of this industry. And I'm like, but what do you have? Like, do you have even like notes on a notepad or a napkin? And then the answer oftentimes is no. So I would, in looking for a co-founder, now, because I'm in those shoes right now, I feel like companies don't usually start with people sitting, like how they kind of make you feel in business school, where you sit in a group and say, let's start a company. What are we going to do? it starts off with like being either super passionate or irritated by or hurt or annoyed, super frustrated with something where you're like, there is a solution to this. Why is nobody fixing it? Or why is no one addressing it? Or why is someone not making this more, why isn't there, for instance, my biggest gripe is, when is Uber for children coming around? I know that liability wise, that's probably why it's not happening. But like, when is that going to happen? Because I need that. I will be the first to sign up and pay 7 times the price. So you sit, it's not usually around a table, but you have this feeling of like, I need to fix it. And then you start realizing, oh, you just have to start somewhere. And then how I would look for a co-founder is, in my case, I've never like looked for a co-founder. You start working with someone, start brainstorming, start getting ideas, or like you just start working together and you're like, oh my gosh, this person is indispensable, right? And I know a lot of people can't find co-founders in that way, but that's how it's been in my case, at least. Yeah.
Right. So talking about, so you spoke about the mistakes that people make in their startups and talking about the exits and everything. So let's talk a bit about AI side of things. So why do so many AI-driven startups fail? First of all, obviously, a lot of startups fail anyway. But generally, if you talk about, for example, AI-backed startups, AI machine learning-backed startups, what are the mistakes that they make in terms of the expectations of the product, as far as that is concerned? And obviously, do they like underestimate the complexity of it? Do they not find the talent for it? Are they not really, like you mentioned, maybe they're married too much to the exits and not too much to the product itself? What exactly are the challenges in that area?
Too many to count, but I think that the main challenge and the biggest problem in AI, I would say in the tech world and also investment community, and obviously they're directly linked, is that the AI world today is like dominated by people that have that are on paper AI experts, as in, so first of all, like I think you're probably aware how hard it is to find someone that's actually done a degree in AI and done it at a reputable institution. When I say reputable, if you want to have a degree in AI and you want that to actually count, it needs to come from a top institution. You need to learn from the absolute world experts. And I wouldn't say that that's the case for other degrees. Like you could do, I don't know, a literature degree or a physics degree where everything's already, not everything, but things have been established at a lot of different places. But what happens is these people spend years and years in school in a very difficult program, and they're already like top in the world, at least academically, in terms of like officially what AI is today. And I think there's a huge challenge, which is that a lot of the investors today, they themselves don't have a degree in machine learning AI, right? So then they see that the CEO or the CTO or the team are all graduates of, AI from MIT or Stanford, blah, blah, blah. And you look at them, you're like, okay, that's a heavy hitter team, tech-wise, STEM-wise. They say like, these are on paper experts in AI, which is the case if we accept or we assume that the way that people do AI machine learning today is the correct way and the only way. There's an ongoing narrative of how AI, like what AI is, how it should be done, its promises, et cetera, that date back to the 1940s to the 1960s that people don't realize. They either don't know, they don't realize, or they don't accept. It's too painful to accept. Imagine spending 1,000 years in school suffering and finding out, oh shit, this we maybe should explore other avenues. So you have these investors or VCs that come in, and you take, like, these are people that, yeah, they have performed the best in their programs, and they are today's AI experts. However, today's AI is not intelligent. Today's AI cannot achieve the promises that we've been listening to and hearing for the last, I would say, 10 years, 15 years, but the average person on the street now has been really absorbing it for the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years.
Right.
So I would say that's the biggest problem is, you have this team that thinks they can achieve something, and it's not because they're not smart, ambitious, or even creative enough. It's that there are inevitable and unavoidable roadblocks in AI if you use today's AI and today's methodology. There are certain things you cannot achieve and escape from. Yeah.
And I think that obviously whatever that top level skilled AI resources are available in the market, again, there's so much of demand for them that to keep them constantly engaged with your startup and actually build a product. Obviously, I mean, a product could easily take like 6 months to 1 year to at least get built, right? If not, we're not talking about a POC here, we're talking about a full blown application, right? So kind of keeping people occupied, that level of skill level, and obviously they're, like, for example, way more expensive as compared to like a typical software developer anyway, right? And then with startups being so much cash strapped as well at the same time, I think there's like very conflicting dynamics there. So yeah, so I think that's obviously the reason why building a startup itself is very challenging, and so many of them fail as well. But thank you so much, Christina, for taking the time for this podcast episode. It was lovely having you on this episode, and really talked about some of the very interesting stuff.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
Have a great day. Bye.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.